just maybe, speaking up and bluntly telling the truth can stop the next generation from looking at things the same way. The story of America is really one of self-reliance and optimism and profound faith, not only in the context of religious freedom, but also in the unprecedented faith in the ability of human beings to control their own destiny. And while the spirit of personal responsibility was extraordinarily strong with our founders, eventually those seeking a different path than the ones the founders settled on realized the only way to really defeat the Constitution was for the people to stop reading it. Progressives realized victory required changing history.
The common assumption is that the Nazis were a right-wing phenomenon. They were a right-wing party, that Hitler was a man of the right and all the rest. And there are a lot of problems with this. His social agenda was for expanding universal access to health care. It was for expanding access to education. It was for cradle-to-grave welfare state. It was for attacking big business and high finance. People say, well, Hitler abolished labor unions. He was right-wing then. Well, how did labor unions do under Stalin? How are labor unions doing under Fidel Castro?
Today, this idea may seem controversial, but as the Nazis were rising to power, it wasn't controversial. It was common knowledge. November 28, 1925, a tiny article printed in the New York Times describing the early internal struggle for the identity of the Nazis. A riot broke out after a Nazi speaker claimed that Lenin was the greatest man second only to Hitler, and the difference between communism and the Hitler faith was very slight.
The goal of the Nazi Germany would be to destroy this Jewish Bolshevism in the Soviet Union, as they described it, and instead of that, build the true socialism. That's what he wrote in his diary. And of course, Goebbels was a liar, but why would he lie to his own diary?
The Nazis versus the Bolsheviks in Germany was really a case of Coke versus Pepsi.
Even as the Nazis were taking control of France, the French communist newspaper found reason to celebrate. While Hitler certainly opposed communism outwardly, he did so mainly because he disagreed with its internationalism.
But he embraced socialism entirely. He embraced the idea of racial solidarity, socialism for one race.
Even in Mein Kampf, he acknowledged that the movements were so close that if not for the focus on race, his National Socialist movement would really do nothing more than compete with Marxism on its own ground.
The goal of the Nazi Germany would be to destroy this Jewish Bolshevism. I was expecting actually that there will be similarities between Nazism and Soviet communism, but I was actually amazed to discover how similar were those posters, and the posters were so similar that as if one artist had drawn them. I was actually amazed to discover how similar were those posters, and the posters were so similar that as if one artist had drawn them. Of course, I think it is because they were both, their ideologies were very similar, and their expression, therefore, was very similar as well.
The fathers of communism, Marx and Engels. As the revolution happens, the classes and the races too weak to master the new conditions of life must give way. George Bernard Shaw.
If you're not producing as much as you consume, or perhaps a little more, then clearly we cannot use the big organization of our society for the purpose of keeping you alive, because your life does not benefit us.
Here's another story of genocide that for some reason history has erased.
The totalitarian system established by Stalin was responsible for murdering millions of innocent people.
Ernesto Che Guevara.
He said that his dream was to become a killing machine.
But surely Che was a progressive and uniting force on race, right?
He says, the Negro is lazy and indolent and spends all of his money on frivolities and booze. This is from his own diaries. We've got Jay-Z with a song with the lyrics, I'm just like Che Guevara with a bling on.
I'm like Che Guevara with bling on. I'm complex.
Maybe he is complex. Either that or this guy doesn't know that this guy would have thought that this guy was nothing but a frivolous, lazy drunk just because of the color of his skin.
Please do a lot of research before you make a fool of yourself.
Look 50 years into the future, and there are only two unapologetic communist regimes, North Korea and Cuba.
Two of my favorite political philosophers, Mao Zedong and Mother Teresa.
Dunn's comments, once again, highlight the odd treatment that leftist totalitarianism receives by too many in our society. Communism is looked at as something we can borrow from liberally, even today. So what can we do to correct the lies? Maybe it's time to ignore the revisionist rehab. It is only understanding history that we can stop this from happening again and again and again.
Really a case of Coke versus Pepsi.
Racist. Dunn's comments.
Their ideologies were very similar.
Stop the next generation from looking at things the same way. The game is going to be on.